Hey there, my name is Sage, and in this video I'm going to be explaining how I built this camper setup in my 2006 Honda Element. While I don't have specific plans drawn up, hopefully by watching this video you will get an idea of some of the methods that you could use to build a camper in your own SUV or vehicle. I use mostly pretty basic tools and beginner techniques, so hopefully this can be a useful roadmap no matter your skill level. Let's get into it. I had actually previously posted a video detailing how to build just the bed, platform, box portion that you're going to see in the beginning, but I decided I wanted to put everything in one video that explains everything in a little more detail. So if you did watch that one and want to skip past it, I will put a timestamp on the screen right now to skip past the box part. The bed platform is made from 3/4 inch plywood. I used a nicer finish grade ply, but in hindsight, I would have been fine with a rougher grade. Basically, we're making a box with the rear face of it open so that a large pull-out drawer will fit in it. My box is 60 inches long and 36 inches wide, but yours may vary depending on your specific vehicle and configuration. I started off by cutting my plywood to size. Notice I'm not using a table saw here. That's because I don't actually even own one, so I had to make do with the tools that I do have. With something like this box that is pretty straightforward and has all right angles, this is not a big deal. All you gotta do is find a nice long straight edge and clamp it down to your workpiece, and will act as a guide for your circular saw and give you cuts that are effectively straight. Make sure your guide edge is actually truly straight though, because if it's not, you'll get weird curves and stuff in your cuts. Factory edges on plywood are usually straight enough for me. I'm using this piece of butcher block that I know to be straight. If you do this method, just be cautious of your saw drifting away from that straight edge, as well as tilting side to side, because those will cause your cuts to not be perfect. Now that I've got all the pieces cut, it's time to glue the box together. I don't have enough clamps or time to get this all together with just glue, so I used screws to hold it together. If you haven't done any work with wood before, it's important to know that the glue is what provides the box strength and not the screws. While the screws may add a tiny bit of strength, they're mostly there to keep the pieces in place while the glue dries. I'm also using right angle clamp to make sure it's nice and square on that joint. Screwing straight in like I'm doing here is not necessarily the strongest way to join things. If you have access to a pocket hole jig, I recommend doing that for spots that don't need to look nice or won't be seen. You will see with almost everything in this project, I pre-drill holes with a countersink bit. This ensures that the wood doesn't split and also ensures the screw head doesn't protrude on my box where it could catch on things. For screws, just make sure they're long enough to go through your bottom panel and have enough extra length to bite onto something on your side panel. Don't go too long or you might split the wood. Once you've got one side glued and screwed, just repeat the process for all of the sides of the box, making sure everything has sufficient glue and is nice and square. And then once everything is glued up, it's important to test it. This is gonna be your bed, so you might as well go ahead, take a little nap, make sure it works. Everything seems to be fine on mine. Next, I went back to the box and I filled some of the voids in the plywood and some places where I messed up with some wood filler. Once that dried, I gave everything a nice sanding so that all the joints flushed up and all that wood filler was sanded away. When I tried test fitting the platform in my Element, I realized that because it was so large and so heavy, it was pretty awkward to carry, so I decided to put 4 carry handles into the box. I started by measuring out where they would sit, made a small hole that acted as a seat for my Forstner bit. In the past, I've had my Forstner bit drift right as I'm starting the hole, and then my hole ends up off from where I actually want it to be. Once I got the larger holes drilled with the Forstner bit, I connected 2 holes together with my jigsaw, and voila, there's my handle. Sand those bad boys up nicely and we're ready to go. I also cut out some access panels towards the front of the box where I was planning on having a little bit of extra storage. Once I had everything sanded, we were on to painting. I just used paint from past projects that I had lying around, nothing fancy, nothing special. I recommend doing some sort of finish though, whether it's paint or poly, just something to protect the wood should any water get onto it. And I think we've reached another good point to take a 15-minute break if you need another nap. I needed a bit longer of a break, so I took about 3 or 4 weeks. Actually moved into a new place, so that's why my workspace looks different now than it did at the beginning of this video. Now we are moving on to the shelves inside the vehicle. This can get incredibly tedious. I wanted to put shelves on both sides of the bed this time, so I got the bed platform inside and made sure it was centered. I took out a roll of butcher paper and cut out a big piece that'd be large enough to serve as a template for my bottom shelf. The walls of the element have curves and varying depths, and it's gonna take several rounds of guessing and checking to make sure we have a tight enough fit for our shelves. I put the butcher paper down on the floor next to the platform and just marked the areas that needed to be cut out. I had to tape a little bit of extra paper on where I cut it too slim. Once I was happy with my template, I flipped it over and checked it on the other side to make sure I was still pretty centered in the element. It looked good, so I grabbed some plywood and started tracing my template onto the plywood. I knew I wanted to have a 1/8 inch face frame on my shelving units, so I counted for that when I was tracing. Once the tracing was done, I got out my jigsaw and started cutting, making sure to go slow and take my time. Once I was done, I checked to make sure they fit. I tested both sides together and slid in some masonite on each side to act as a face frame. I'll get to that later, but for now I think it's looking good. All right, time to move on to upper shelves. For these, I used cardboard rather than butcher paper for the template. While the cardboard is a little bit tougher to cut accurately, I needed them to be rigid because they were gonna be suspended in the air as I was marking them. So I put a piece of cardboard up against the wall at the height that I wanted it and just started marking with a pencil where the curves of the wall were. These weren't going to be perfect, but I wanted to have them pretty good. I had a couple rounds of marking and trimming and marking and trimming, and I did that for both my second and third shelf. I had originally planned to do another shelf above it, but as I was kind of mocking it up, I realized how much storage I already had and thought I would enjoy the openness more than any additional storage. Once I was satisfied with the template, I brought it to some plywood and began tracing it again. Next, I helped my partner Kat replace the cotter pin on her ball hitch, but this step is optional for you. Once I was done with that, I cut out the shelf using the template that I traced onto my plywood and then brought it back into the element to test. After working on these shelves for a while, I felt like I needed a break, so I decided to move on to a different part of the project. I'm going to now work on the platform that extends the bed to be full length. This is a simple rectangular piece that basically makes it so the bed butts up against the seats when they're pushed forward, and I have a nice long bed. So I cut out a big rectangle. Once I got it cut to size, I installed these folding shelf brackets that would act as support for this extension piece. These shelf brackets come with little screws to screw into a wall, but I was pretty sure that they weren't going to be sufficient. Mine was going to need to bear some weight since it was part of my bed, so I through bolted it with a washer and a nut on the inside of the box. Hey look, it works. I painted a couple coats of the same gray onto the extension and then attached it to the box with a couple of door hinges. And if everything seems to be working okay, I would say this is a good spot for another nap. All right, now back to the shelves. Now that all the horizontal shelves were cut, I needed to start working on the upright portions of the shelving units. Thanks to some help from Kat and the magic of time-lapse videography, this took no time at all. Once I had everything cut, I laid out my shelves on the floor just to make sure everything was looking right. I know it does look kind of funky, but this really is how it's gonna look in order to fit nicely against the inside wall of the element. To join the shelves, I used the same method that I used for the box platform earlier. The only difference is that for the shelves, I used 1/2 inch ply instead of 3/4 inch. That was nice because it made the shelves nice and light, but I will say that the narrower edges of the ply can make it harder to get a screw right in the middle and not split some plies off. So if you are using 1/2 inch ply, just be sure to take your time, get your screws dead center on the edges of the ply. I messed up a bit, but it was fine, not a big deal. One of the great things about painting everything is that I can hide some of my amateur woodworker mistakes with coats of paint. Once I had both shelves assembled, I did another test fit. This is actually a pretty important part. You can see here that my platform doesn't push in all the way. To fix this, essentially I did several rounds of marking parts where the shelves touched the wall and then trimming the excess off. I did this until my box could slide in snugly with a couple of pieces of thin ply acting as stand-in faceplates. If you are wondering about these faceplates that I keep talking about, we're getting to that right now. I wanted my whole shelf to have one uniform piece of wood on the front of it. So basically what I did is I took my completed shelf and I laid it on a piece of 1/4 inch ply. I got it clamped down and traced the edges of the shelf on the inside and on the outside. Once I was done, I removed the shelf and measured a 1/4 inch from some of the lines so that I would have lips on some of the shelves that would help things not slide out when driving. I rounded some of the corners using this little round thing that I had in my house so that I would have a nice little design feature and they would all have a uniform radius. Once I had all my lines drawn, I taped up the backside with some painter's tape so that when I went to cut all my holes, I didn't have too much tear out. That's where the saw causes the back end of the plywood to splinter off. I used a drill to make some holes where I could insert my jigsaw. Then I just went to town cutting out each and every one of the spaces to make a nice face frame that fit my shelf perfectly. This process was tedious. After I removed all the tape, I had a completed face frame. I sanded it up nicely and then repeated all those steps for the other shelf. I didn't have the best tool for the job when it came to attaching the face frame. I would have preferred to use some small brad nails to hold it in place while the glue dried, but I couldn't find the battery for my brad nailer. So I used screws and glued it up that way. It doesn't look as good, but oh well, it's getting paint. It's not going to be a big deal. I placed some heavy objects on the backside of the shelf while it was drying face down, just to make sure that it had a nice good bond with the glue. Once it was dry, I did one last round of trimming the back edge of the shelf so that the box would just slide in and have a nice snug fit. And with that, I had a good functional camper for my element. One question that I get a ton for past element builds is how I attached and installed the setup. This particular build is pretty much just a pressure fit. The box holds the shelves in and vice versa. I did attach the shelves on the floor level by just putting a couple screws through the 2 tie-down mounts on each side and into the bottom shelf. If I find down the road that I have any shifting or unwanted movement, I do have some other ideas for attaching things, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it, and so far this one is holding up really well. I did several other things to the camper setup after this, and I recorded them, but I accidentally deleted the footage. So now what we're gonna do is just close our eyes and imagine me doing these things. I built the inner drawer the same as everything else. I used 1/2-inch ply to keep it lighter in weight, glues, screws, all the same stuff you've seen already. But essentially it's just one big box that is open on top, as you can see, or if you actually are closing your eyes, as you can imagine. At some point down the line, I'll probably create dividers and maybe a lid for it. But I wanted to see how I actually use this space before I made a permanent organization system for it. Prior to this camper setup, I had never actually used or attached drawer slides before. I watched a handful of YouTube videos on it in preparation. Admittedly, I was a little nervous, but it ended up going really well. My drawer functions perfectly. I also painted the shelf, as you can see, with 2 colors. I bought a 100-pack of picture hanger hardware for like dirt cheap on Amazon and attached them to the inside of the shelves so I could string bungees from one side of the shelf to the other, and that would help keep things on the shelf when I'm going around corners or going on bumpy dirt roads, that kind of thing. I also got this 3-inch mattress. I like this particular one not because it happened to be the exact length and width of my bed, but it came with a removable waterproof cover as well as a carry bag. This whole thing rolls up so it's perfect for camping and then storing when you get at home. I'll put links in the description for a bunch of the items I used, including this mattress, the folding shelf brackets, and the drawer slides. If you click the links and make a purchase, I do get a small kickback from Amazon. I personally try not to order on Amazon if I don't have to, so if you kind of do the same thing, I totally understand. While the camper build probably will go through some changes and evolution, I would say that it's mostly finished at this point. I'll for sure be drilling a grid of holes on the top of the bed platform for ventilation, as well as to hopefully partially reduce the weight of the whole thing. These lower pocket shelf thingies are a little harder to access than I had hoped, so I want to work out a system there. My original plan was just to put soft goods in there, like socks, underwear, beanies, that kind of stuff, but they're still kind of hard to reach to the bottom. So I want to create some sort of pole strap system that will lift the contents of these lower pockets so you don't have to dig so deep to get at it. I'm sure I'll have plenty of other projects for this camper as well. These things never seem to be a finished product. It's always a work in progress. I hope you enjoyed this video. I plan to do an official tour of this camper build out once I've used it for a decent amount of time and worked out some of the organization and systems and that kind of stuff. But if you found this video helpful or interesting, let me know down in the comments. And if you want to see more of my videos, hit the subscribe button and check out some of my older videos. This is my 4th Honda Element camper build, so maybe this one doesn't work for you, but some of my other ones might. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.